Ekkin. Aside from the travails following the assassination of Menaxes I and the theft of judgment, the darkest moment of the first Melanthonids was their end, when Ligarius warred against his sister Leomeda for their father's crown. From such conflict no true emperor arose, and in their place came a 4-decade anarchy called the Interregnum. The fires of hatred burned hot in those years, and it is said the gods themselves wept for the outrages committed by neighbor against neighbor, father against son, brother against sister. From Gaius Aetian's Norrene History, Book 24, Chapter 6. Well? Carla smiled viciously from atop her couch. Ekkin gritted his teeth. You were right. The negotiations were short. Oh! Carla laughed triumphantly before taking a sip of watered wine. Then tell to me the terms. Has Hormisdas given over his crown and arms? Ekkin shifted in place, the flap to his sister's tent snickering behind him. It would behoove me, dear sister, his knuckles whitened around Fortune's pommel, to first remind you your history. Soothing my ears for a thought already woven, she chuckled. How well do you use father's tutors? Ekkin bit his tongue. The Mutzing Green, he began, would have the world believe this war began 10 years ago, when his grace Tychon Otho disposed Hormisdas and replaced him with Creon of Red Navria. They say the night it happened the palace's olive trees were burned and blood oranges planted in their stead, and so they claim murdering Creon was merely righting a wrong. I've heard no sightings of such trees myself, but regardless, that is why we set out, to avenge Creon and return his son Creos to his father's throne. I assumed the boy was there? Carla leaned back. Had he something characteristically sharp to say? You might refrain, Ekkin's reply was lumbering, from calling a man of 10 and 6 boy. Mayhaps I should. Carla took another sip. You might know. Ekkin gritted his teeth. Besides Creos, present were Lords Titus, not his grace? Ekkin shook his head. No. As I was saying, present were Lords Titus, Vulp, and Nox, King Hormisdas himself, his queen Carmene, and ambassadors riding ahead of Farnace's host, 2 days to our west. In exchange for their retreat, go on. In exchange for their retreat, Ekkin glowered, King Hormisdas is to return to his seat in Green Navria on condition he adopt Creos as his heir, wed him to his daughter, and for 10 years submit tribute to the Emperor Noria. Carla took another sip of wine. That's not too bad. Not too bad? Ekkin's face contorted. Prince of Beasts, what do you mean, not too bad? I mean, it's avoided a war, hasn't it? Carla raised an eyebrow. You do realize that, right? Of course I do, Ekkin snapped. If you were there, you would have found it just as aggravating how eagerly everyone agreed to it. Carmene especially, after seeing a 4th her city put to the torch. Once inside, Nox's cavalry had set fire to the entire western district, their rampage only ceasing when Carmene had sued for peace. Ekkin clenched his hands. If we had kept pushing, we could have had the city. Then, with those walls, we could have crushed Farnaces at his own game. But no, we're headed east. So? You don't get it, do you? Ekkin slammed a fist against a nearby pole. Nothing's changed. We've risked our lives for nothing. Our men, the loyal men of Mount Viridian, died for nothing. And where we made fools of ourselves, Lords Marula and Nox got all the glory. He drew Fortune. You wanted to see it? Well, here it is. All the good it did me. Grunting, he slammed Fortune back into its sheath. Carla got up from her seat. That's not the whole truth, is it? Ekkin turned away. No, he whispered, watching afternoon rays prance along the canvas. There's to be a banquet tonight. Valerius, Bruno, and I are to receive honors, such as they are. What wonderful news! Carla exclaimed. From the Emperor, surely. Ekkin was silent for a time. Yes, but what? The edge had returned to her voice. It was a hollow victory, he finally spat. Hardly our victory at all. And what part of it is mine? It was pathetic. He didn't find, much less lead, the way into the city. He hadn't turned the winch. He hadn't fooled the guard. All he had done was nearly die to one and make poor work of 2 others. Ekkin put a hand to his aching ribs, the burning view from the gatehouse again before him. Between the negotiations, he barely had time to have anyone see to him, much less bathe or rest. That's all he had to show. A half-burned city, 2 broken ribs, and the hammer that had done it, retrieved during the sack. And then there had been him. Corpse hands. Dawn had risen since he'd seen him last. He's probably stolen a horse by now and well on his way to New Elon. But a victory nonetheless. Carla put a hand on his shoulder. Ekkin, be courteous to yourself. Isn't this exactly what our father wanted? Ekkin said nothing. She was right, after all. He should just accept it. And yet he could hear the sneers. Ekkin the coward, they said. Ekkin the fraud. Ekkin who only won because of his daddy's magic sword. He slipped from his sister's touch. I have to go, he muttered. I haven't slept in a day. A moment later he was outside, squinting under a sharp sky and scathing sun. Ekkin took the long way back. Eventually he found himself by the carcere. Built of wood and wrought iron, it was little more than several square pits dug into the earth, lined with stakes and filled with the cities captured. Most were Kertari. All wore rags. Feckless idiots. Ekkin sneered as he passed them swarthing beneath the summer sun, couldn't even avoid capture. Those left unransomed would be marched back to Fair Calais and paraded for Tychon Otho's triumph. Those who were deemed unfit to march, they're already dead. Ekkin felt his lips droop, even if their hearts yet bleed beneath this baker's sun. Each pen held near 100, and betwixt Kellon's daughter and a cloudless sky, most were huddled in whatever shade existed beneath the pen's fortified walls. Wind worshippers. Ekkin began to turn. Then he saw. In the pit's center, shading themselves with a piece of canvas, one of the prisoners was looking right at him. Their gazes met, and Ekkin turned to stone. It was her, the one from the gatehouse. Her eyes were hateful, but a cold hatred. Fire long smoldered into ash, leaving only the dare. He couldn't look away. If he did, he was weak. Then he, not her, belonged down in the pit. She was dirty, covered in a thin film of dust and dried blood. Wounds young and old nicked her elbows, her shoulders, her thighs. And yet she stared, bearing on her not the mark of tears, but the fires of green Navria. Prince of beasts. You there! He growled to a guard sitting nearby. Which ones are these? Honked a weak chin lout of about 40. His breath stank of wine. Serpent sting. Tell to me, Ekkin repeated in low Norian. Which ones are these? What's going on here? Another guard waddled over. Which prisoners are these? Ekkin clenched harder the sword by his hip. Ah, his Valetian accent made him sound half duck. These here are the runts. Nobody wants them, so I doubt they'll last through the day. His beady eyes narrowed. Who's asking? Sir Ekkin Helster. He gritted his teeth. Aide to the Magister of Siege and commander of Mount Viridian's forces. Oh, you're the Heckin' Elster, the drunk one quacked. He's the one I was telling you about. Ekkin froze. What? What? Idiots. That one, he pointed to the woman. I'm ransoming her. With due respect, sir. The standing guard put his hands together, hiding a smile. Methinks the policy. Tell the Prince of Beasts your policy. Ekkin looked up into the soldier's eyes. I'm having her. Well then. He nodded his head back and forth. The cost, we might. You can speak to my men about the cost, Ekkin shouted. A duck's a goose when they both burn your blood. Just get it done. Now! Sweating, the soldier motioned for some of the others nearby. After donning arms, they went down through a trench into the pit. Against a mass of dead-eyed prisoners, Ekkin watched them clear a path with shield and spear, then motioned the woman forward with those same tools. Once they'd led her above, he finally got a better look. She was taller than him, with tight, soldierly hair and freckles hidden atop her skin. Even after the guards were seated, she eyed them, warily, until turning to Ekkin. Are you all right? He asked in stumbling Navrian. Why? Her voice was a thunderbolt. Why? Ekkin made a face. I just delivered you from... His eyes went wide. Wait, you know Norian? Of course I do. She wrinkled her nose. You'd forget half your tongues too after seeing your friends butchered and a blade at your throat. Besides, she crossed her arms, whatever you spoke, it wasn't Norian. Ekkin stared blankly at her until he realized. Oh. And again, she glared down at him. Why have you freed me? Ekkin's skin burned. Don't you know what they were going to do? It is obvious enough a thing. She clasped a hand behind her neck. Your empire had already taken the ransomed, the tributed, the triumphed. What remains for us? By malice or neglect, we have been denied water. They wait on our fates lightly, to in time move us somewhere else, and not care when less arrive. Then she turned. Her ears, they had long been pulled and molded, clipped, such that they appeared as leaves of a tree, or a blade. Her ears? Ekkin tried not to stare. They made his stomach weak. What happened to them? The woman glared at him. Although I am from Kertar, she tapped the tip of a pointed ear, I was raised among the Galazi on the plains of Aleke. Such is their custom, as is to ride the horse, to shoot the bow, and to speak the truth. Ekkin motioned to the dozens of others in the pit. Are any of them your kinsmen? We Kertari are all kin, she replied sharply. No, I meant the others. Ekkin shook his head. The Glazazi, or whatever you called them. Although her eyes were two shadow-black knives, she held her tongue. Those I once lived with, she finally answered, are all far from here. Now, to return. Why have you freed me? The words clung to Ekkin's throat. Did you think to buy me? Her disgust rivaled Carla's. Or expected me to kneel, did you? To swear my arms to yours forevermore, after you murdered my companions? Her eyes narrowed. Or would you have passed me over had I another's face, a body opposed to the one I was made with? No, Ekkin stammered. I felt I should. Especially after what happened. Wait, What's your name? The Kertari woman sighed. She seemed to be almost laughing at him. After you. Sir Ekkin of the Helsterids. This time the words were prideless, heir to Mount Viridian and her forces. Erga, she replied, for I am ever faced towards hope. Do you intend to kill me, Erga? Ekkin heard himself say, after I and my lieutenant slew your friends. I, Erga's gaze was fire, am unbound. Should I so wish, that magic sword by your hip would already have run you through, even at the cost of my own life. Ekkin gulped. Well, so, if you need water then, or bread, a nest, find my tents to the northeast. They will provide for you. It's the least I can do, one warrior to another. Erga didn't move. Do you not see my rags, my face? She scowled. And to think we'd lost the city to the likes of you, warrior. And you fainted! Ekkin could have struck her. You threw down your sword, your life was mine, and now I've given it back to you, and you treat me with contempt. Just so, though, the rage soon faded, leaving only bubbling shame. Wait, I didn't... Forgive me, wind worshippers. Look. Ekkin ripped off one of his gloves, Arcania's silk braced with leather. Beneath was a ring, second and copy to his father's own. Taking some ash from a nearby campfire, he dusted the ring's face and pressed its mark upon the glove's surface. Here, they'll know what it means. Erga glanced down, then back up, and yanked the glove from his hand. Wordless, she turned to leave. Do you intend to kill me? He asked again. She glanced back. In her eyes was an answer, but it was one Ekkin didn't know. Then she was gone, vanished towards the setting sun. Erga. He repeated the word to himself. It was a pretty name. Wherever she had gone, it wasn't Ekkin's quarters, for when he returned, none had seen the one matching her face. Exhausted, Ekkin sat down on his bed and, piece by piece, slowly began to unclasp the armor of alabaster and silver and emerald he had so hastily donned that morn. Beneath, the skin was still raw, grimy with sweat and dirt and dried blood. He puts a hand to his chest, bare save a bandage around his broken ribs, imagining soft hands caressing his worn skin. Wordless, he leans back, only to catch sight of another bed already filled. Hey Bruno, Ekkin sighed. That you, Captain? He faced the far wall. Have you been granted any sleep? For a while the big man was silent. Mayhaps, he said finally. I dreamt an eagle with a gosling in its claws. She begged he let her go, that a year a better meal she would make. What did the eagle do? Ekkin asked blankly. He denied her. Better then have you in my power, for then every meal, your choicest bits would be mine. Silence yawned between them. I know not, Bruno went on. If the dream was Estelle's or Labyrinth Weaver fights Dira's, but whenever my eyes close, there are the flames, the horses, the lamentation. I know, Ekkin murmured. Captain, Bruno's gaze stayed far. Is the war over? A long moment passed between them. For now, he finally answered. Get some rest. In a few hours we're to receive honors, such that they are. It was evening when Ekkin woke. He scrubbed his face with a cloth, and cloaked the scent and soil of battle in perfumes and silk. He had overslept. Grim-faced, Ekkin traversed the camp to Tychon Otho's stronghold, trying to focus on the path and not the whispers of onlookers. Stating his rank and purpose, Ekkin Helster entered into the presence of the Emperor. The celebration was large for one so hastily constructed. Held within Tychon Otho's makeshift palace, the evening's banquet had 3 tables, 2 low and 1 high, mimicking a banquet among officers, or friends. His were waiting just inside, like the rest having yet to take their seats. Why didn't you wake me? Ekkin snapped at his legate upon entering. Valerius turned to him, armed with a clutch of wine. I was kept afar. Kept afar? Ekkin made a face. Despite his vagary, however, his legate was shaved and bathed. Ekkin opened his mouth to protest, only for Bruno to put a hand on his shoulder. Turning back, only then did Ekkin notice the exhaustion in his friend's eyes. Serpent sting. What happened? This time he was smoother. Valerius' dead gaze passed over the crowd. I do not wish to speak of it. We should take our seats. Soon they will serve. Sure enough, after Ekkin had scarcely found his own cup, a great bell rang and all took their seats. Ekkin, Valerius, and Bruno sat as honored guests at the Emperor's high table, albeit far from his opulent chair, iridescent tablecloth, and shining ornaments. Between him and them were half the High Lords, Hygathon and Cybeth and Nox and dreaded Poch. Even Lord Orion had dragged himself from bed. While they talked amidst themselves, Ekkin tried not to touch the spots he feared he had scrubbed inadequately. First they were served eggs mixed with nuts and honey, then charred olives stuffed with cheese, waterfowl stewed in wine, berries, fresh and wild, 2 entire oxen, the choicest bits set aside for the gods. While Ekkin and Valerius ate what they could, Bruno's plate remained untouched, his gaze fixed on the banquet center. There, in a conflagration of incense and silken finery, many danced to the meter of old Chilean poems or the more bombastic passages of Galeria's longings. What spirit keeps you? Ekkin turned to his friend. They dance. Bruno's mouth was flat, while others cry. You still see them, then? I hear them, Bruno muttered. All of them. But do they? He turned to Ekkin. If they do, or they do not. His eye said the rest. Ekkin looked out into the crowd, recognizing many of its faces. I don't know, but we saved them, saved ours regardless, even if the work wasn't entirely. Even if among them is a traitor. Ekkin knew not what to make of that, only that eventually Nox would return with his report, and hopefully little else would come of it. What about you, Valerius? Ekkin turned to his legate, only to find him staring at something through the crowd, gulping down mouthful after mouthful of wine as if it would make him see differently. Ekkin followed his gaze to the far table. There, by the edge, amidst the lesser courtiers, sat a man. Tall and lithe he was, clean-shaven, with a head of immaculately combed hair cascading over a tunic of blood brown. An engraved gold pendant covered his heart, matching the ring adorning his right hand, one whose fingers left no doubt. Save for his ring and last, they were stained white. Their eyes met. Ekkin then blinked, and Corpse Hands had returned to his fellows as if nothing had happened. What is he doing here? Ekkin hissed. Before Valerius could respond, however, Tychon Otho rose and ordered all to silence. My subjects, my countrymen, my friends. He extended an arm across the crowd. It is with great honor that I address you on this most fortuitous of evenings. What followed was a long, meandering speech, such was Tychon Otho's custom, beginning even before the war's outbreak months prior and continuing to the current day. As he spoke, however, to Ekkin he seemed a vestige of the man he had been even the afternoon prior, gaunt and swaying in the breeze, eyes red and face swollen. He had been drinking, and heavily, that much was certain. And that is why, he finished, at New Elon, the western gate, we shall hold a series of martial games to celebrate this great victory. He raised his cup. Noria conquers.
Noria conquers,
the crowd roared, either with their own cups or an outstretched arm. But, Typhon Otho continued after draining his cup, I shame myself and you all by failing to name those who, without their toiling, this day could not have been achieved. First, I grant honors upon my lips, Lord Titus Hygathon, for leading such swift negotiations in my absence. Stalwart-faced, Lord Titus rose to applaud before reclaiming his seat. I must also honor my sword and gripping finger, Lord Terrans and Nox, who bravely led the assault on Green Navria's walls alongside Nox's heavy cavalry, and whose prudence led to only minimal damages. Each then rose in turn. While Lord Nox saluted the Emperor, Lord Terrans waved to the crowd, smiling innocently, a hand behind his head. Next to Ekkin, Bruno was clutching the table's edge. However, the Emperor went on, we must also congratulate this day's true heroes, who tempted gods and men alike with their bravery. Come forth, Sirs Valerius of the Morones, Bruno of the Hortatori, and Ekkin of the ancient Helsterids. The crowd cheered as Ekkin and his friends stood before the Emperor, bowing their heads. Onto each, Empress Procne nestled a wreath of gilt feathers and leaves, representing the Norian grips and the golden bow of Victory's own bedchamber. As she lowered Ekkin's crown, he thought only of how greasy his balding head must look after a night of battle and a day of consequence. In addition, Typhon Otho declared as they rose, I grant you each a single wish, for you undeserving. Ekkin could hear him add, he should have smiled, a reward such that it was, even if one where symbolic honors merited symbolic requests. Peace, Bruno answered first, and to serve his majesty, even should it not come to pass. Clever. Ekkin clenched his teeth. He should have thought of that one. Honor, Ekkin answered hastily, for those who I call my family and dedicate my heart. How was that, Carla? Fitting enough for you? Recognition, Valerius answered bluntly, for the hero unadorned and whose work today should not be doubted. Silence followed, until the Emperor spoke. What? Your Grace, Valerius raised his head, if I may. You may speak, the Emperor glowered. There is another, Valerius gulped, one without who we could not have succeeded. He is here now, and I ask that he step forward. Valerius, what are you doing? Ekkin turned his head, only to find his friend's eyes alight with fear. Whispers followed corpse hands as he strode towards the high table, only ceasing once he stood between Ekkin and the Emperor. And who are you? Empress Procne asked. O hero of many mysteries. I will. Typhon Otho started, only for the Empress to raise a hand. He will speak. Empress Procne opened her palm towards the interloper. I, polished high Norian flowed from his tongue as corpse hands bowed, was once prisoner of Green Navria, rescued from death by these sirs here. Before that, however, I was, and am once more, Isolon, last scion of Princess Leomeda, who was once firstborn daughter of Arion the Chooser and final emperor of the first dynasty of the Melanthinids. Gasps resounded around the clearing. What? Ekkin's eyes went wide, but then, that make him? Typhon Otho breathed deeply. What proof have you of such a dramatic assertion? Isolon lifted his right hand and the Emperor's eyes bulged. The ring of Saint Artemisia, lost piece of the royal regalia. That of my bloodline has been ever since Arion gave it to his firstborn daughter to mark her as his heir. Typhon Otho clenched his teeth. And what then were the words Arion supposedly told Princess Leomeda when she fled Fair Calais without a ring, or one bearing its likeness? Isolon smiled. If I have read my histories, O Highness, Isolon smiled, such secrets are only privy to the Lord Prelate of the Holy Blades and your left eye, both of whom fortune has granted be here today. Would His Majesty kindly ask Flame Terrans and Magister Vulp to step forward? Typhon Otho raised a hand. I command this. The Knight of the Crown and the Magister of Lore then peeled off from their respective places and came face to face with Isolon. Each of them in turn lowered their ears to his mouth, followed by their eyes going wide. He said the words. Magister Volp turned to Tychonotho. All of them. He is no impostor, Sir Dominic concurred. Your Majesty, one of the 2 lost royal issues has been found. Tychonotho nodded grimly as the 2 resumed their seats. So, he grumbled, for what reason have you, a man whose presence disturbs me, brought yourself here today? Iceland bowed again. To serve the Empire in any way I can. Once my ancestors, yours too, in some ways at least, held command of this thing, and joyfully I see its stewarding has been a good one. I offer myself to this great idea, to expand its dominion as its greatest servant, for I hold no current persuasion in attaining that which my ancestors once wore. Ekkin's gaze flitted to the mournful crown nestled atop Tychonotho's brow, then the face below, and its hardly contained rage. Good, he declared. For your service I grant you my thanks, but your name, your other attestations, I grant not. Begone from my chambers at once. Of course, your Majesty. Iceland again bowed before turning to leave. Noria conquers. Noria conquers, someone whispered under their breath as the man departed. It was Valerius.